Welcome to the Longevity Formula with Dr. Brandon Crawford. Let's explore the new era of wellness.
What if your brain fog isn't in your brain? What if your anxiety, your low energy, your mood swings are coming from your gut? We tend to separate body and mind, brain and belly. But what if that's a medical myth? You've got more neurons in your gut than in your spinal cord. 90% of serotonin, your feel-good neurochemical, is made in your digestive system. In your vagus nerve, it sends 9 messages up to your brain for every one that it receives. So when we talk about brain health, mental clarity, anxiety, or even spiritual discernment, we have to talk about the gut. Our guest today knows this better than anyone. Dr. Gundry is the best-selling author behind The Plant Paradox, The Longevity Paradox, and most recently, The Gut-Brain Paradox, where he makes the case that the gut isn't just your second brain, it may be your first. Dr. Gundry has helped millions reframe chronic disease, inflammation, and aging through his unique clinical lens. Today, we go deeper than diet. We're talking about light, vagal tone, microbial intelligence, and what you can do tomorrow to start healing the body from the brain down and the gut up. Dr. Gundry, thank you so much for joining us. I am so honored to have you on.
Well, thanks for having me, Brandon, and let's talk all things gut and brain.
Absolutely. I guess just to kind of start off, I'm really curious how you started your career, in the surgical vein, and then how in the world did you end up here now?
I don't want to expand on the point too much, but I was chairman of cardiothoracic surgery and professor at Loma Linda University School of Medicine here in Southern California. And I was a really famous heart surgeon and did a lot of baby heart transplants, etc. And I, like some other famous heart surgeons, was famous for taking on inoperable patients. And we were cocky enough that we'd do operations that nobody else wanted to do. And there's always a few of these sorts of people around. So about 30 years ago now, I was referred a gentleman from Miami, Florida, who I call Big Ed in all my books, who had inoperable coronary artery disease. He was 48 years old. The reason he's called Big Ed is he was 265 pounds when I met him. And Big Ed had a cardiac catheterization movie of his coronary arteries, where all his blood vessels were clogged up. They were so clogged up, you couldn't put stents in them. You couldn't do a bypass because there wasn't any place to land a bypass. And so he'd go around the country, like many other people, going to these centers with idiot surgeons like me. And everywhere he went, everybody turned him down for a very good reason. Mm-hmm. And he spent about 6 months doing this. He arrived with me, and I looked at his angiogram from 6 months ago from Miami, and I said, I agree with everybody else. I can't help you. They're right. And he said, well, wait a minute. I've been doing this for 6 months now. I've been on a diet, and I've lost 45 pounds. So he was over 300 pounds when he started. And I've been going to a health food store, and I'm taking a lot of supplements. And he literally had brought in a giant shopping bag full of supplements with him. And so I'm going, well, good for you for losing some weight, but, it's not going to help anything in here. And I know what you did with all those supplements. You made expensive urine, which I firmly believed back then. And he said, well, look, I've come all the way from Miami. What would it hurt to get another angiogram, another cardiac catheterization? Roll my eyes and, don't get your hopes up. But we did. So in 6 months' time, this guy cleaned out 50% of the blockages in the heart. Gone. And that's impossible. But there I am staring at the 2 angiograms. Mm-hmm. So I asked him about his diet. And it just so happens that the diet he was following was my undergraduate thesis that I defended from Yale University back in the dark ages, that you could take a great ape, manipulate its food supply, manipulate its environment, and prove you'd arrive at a human being. And anyhow, I gave it to my parents. I got an honors on it. Defended my thesis, and I went on to become a famous heart surgeon. But Big Ed was following this diet that I described in my research. And when he started showing me the supplements he had been taking, I was famous for protecting the heart during heart surgery and heart transplantation by putting a glop of stuff in the coronary arteries and veins to protect the cells. And a lot of the glop I was putting down the veins and arteries, he was swallowing. It never occurred to me that I should swallow these things. So I had numerous issues. Even though I ran 30 miles a week and went to the gym 1 hour a day, I was 70 pounds overweight. I had high blood pressure, pre-diabetes, high cholesterol. I did operations with migraine headaches. I had such bad arthritis in my knees. I ran with braces. Anyhow, I was told it was genetic because my father was much the same way. When I changed my diet to my thesis and started taking a bunch of supplements, I lost 50 pounds my first year, subsequently a total of 70 pounds, and kept it off now for 30 years. I started putting the patients I operated on at Loma Linda on this program so that they would never have to have a reoperation, which seemed like a good idea.
Yeah,
because every time we would operate on somebody, they'd be back in 5 or 7 years, and we'd do it all over again. So when I started doing this with my patients at Loma Linda, lo and behold, their high blood pressure went away, their diabetes went away, their arthritis went away. And one day, fateful day, about a year into this, I looked at the mirror and said, I've got this all wrong. I shouldn't operate on people and then teach them how to avoid me by eating. I should teach them how to avoid me first by eating. I'll never have to operate on them in the first place. Dumb idea. I resigned my position at literally the heights of my career. Set off down the road to Palm Springs and set up a clinic where I said, look, I'm a researcher. What do you say I ask you to eat certain foods and don't eat certain foods? Why don't I send you to Costco or Trader Joe's or a health food store to buy some supplements? And I want to draw your blood every 3 months and see what happens. And insurance will cover it and Medicare will cover it. And that's what we did. And kind of the rest is history. It resulted eventually in the publication of The Plant Paradox in 2017, which was a monster bestseller.
Right.
And so I still see patients 6 days a week in my 2 clinics now. And so that's what happened to me. I saw something that was impossible and went about finding out why what was impossible was possible.
Right. And I really appreciate that story because there's so many physicians, whether surgeons. I mean, I know actually a surgeon myself that had a similar experience. She's a neurosurgeon. And because you guys are working with, the worst case scenarios. And when you see these cases and you actually start to work through them and you go, wait a minute, I just saw a change. There's a lot of physicians that will dismiss it. And they just want to, I don't want to say they just want to protect the system, but they just want to, put it aside and say, I'm just going to move on to the next one and, go through the system. So I definitely appreciate you actually just being aware and then looking into it. And then, I mean, it's huge being willing to shift away from the height of your career. That's a big deal. And that takes courage and faith. And so thank you. Hats off.
Or stupidity, as my wife would say.
Oh, that's funny. Well, you bring up the concept of supplementation. It kind of makes me think through something. So when I'm working with patients and, we'll run gut testing and we'll look at, inflammatory markers and we'll look at all these things. And when I see someone with a very inflamed gut with, a gut that's really just not functioning very well, a lot of dysbiosis and the gap junctions are breaking down, et cetera. I start to have concerns about how they assimilate the supplementation that I want to give them. Is this a problem for you? Do you have a solution for those really inflamed GI systems that may have assimilation and absorption problems?
Well, one of the things when I first started doing this almost 30 years ago is we didn't have leaky gut tests, intestinal permeability tests. In fact, probably if you had asked me 30 years ago, I would have told you it was pseudoscience. But, thanks to Alessio Fasano and others, we now not only know that leaky gut exists and exists in most people, but we can actually quantify it and we can watch it heal, seal. But one of the things we didn't have back then, I noticed that my patients with autoimmune diseases, and about 80% of my practice is people with autoimmune diseases that aren't getting any better or don't want to stay on immunosuppressive drugs for the rest of their lives. Like I tell them, I'm a transplant surgeon. What are you doing on one of my transplant drugs? You don't have a heart transplant or a liver transplant. And that gets their attention. So all these people had low vitamin D levels. And I, among others, were cognizant that vitamin D is incredibly important for helping seal leaky gut, for improving intestinal microbiome diversity. And I would push vitamin D3 at them with some K2 aggressively until I got their vitamin Ds above 100 nanograms per milliliter. In fact, I aim for most people 100 to 150. And I noticed, and sometimes it would take, I'd start most people on 10,000 international units or 250 micrograms. But sometimes I had to use 40, 45,000 international units of vitamin D3 a day to get their levels up. And then and we would measure every 3 months. Most times we still do. As we'd hit a point where all of a sudden the vitamin D levels, really started skyrocketing, even though we were on the same dose. And I said, you're absorbing this better. Let's, back down. And so it was my trigger through the years before we had leaky gut tests that I would kind of keep pushing until I saw all of a sudden the vitamin D jump up. And then I go, that's a sign. And lo and behold, that correlated with people's autoimmune markers going down to normal, to unmeasurable. So it was really interesting that vitamin D was the first tip-off that I was watching gut, absorbability work better.
Right. No, it's very interesting. I've actually noticed the same thing. If I'm trying to raise D levels quickly, I typically go 10,000 IUs, maybe up to 20,000. Are you concerned when you go higher from there about liver toxicity at all?
Never seen it. Never seen it in my life.
That's awesome.
The University of California, San Diego, which is a big vitamin D research unit,
right,
has never seen vitamin D toxicity, even at 40,000 international units a day.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Dr. Hollick from Boston University he's the dean of vitamin D. He's only seen it once in his lifetime, and that was a physician who, by accident, from a mislabeled compounding pharmacist, was taking 1 million international units of vitamin D3 a day for 6 months.
Oh my gosh.
Oops.
Which I'm sure once he reduced the dose or stopped taking it, it all just resolved. He was fine.
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. What are your thoughts? Because obviously, vitamin D can be made, from sun exposure, UVB exposure. There's some people out there that will argue, don't supplement vitamin D, get your sun exposure, et cetera. I mean, look, I live in Austin, Texas. Even myself, if I get what I consider adequate sun exposure, my D levels are still low. And I correlate that with chronic stress and, lifestyle and all these things. So I'm a proponent of supplementation in this regard. But do you have a similar thought, or do you think we can achieve vitamin D levels within range with sun?
No. Even Joseph Mercola, who can walk daily in a Speedo on the beach for an hour and a half, his vitamin D levels can only get to about 70.
Yeah.
And in Palm Springs, I have people who are black with tan, and their vitamin D levels are like 50. And, they're shocked that, what do you mean? Look at me, I'm out in the sun. Well, once you get a sun tan, once you get a callus formation on your skin, you stop absorbing vitamin D. And I see it all the time. The other thing that I think people should know is that vitamin D, we have a layer of stem cells in the lining of our gut. And our gut wall is one of the most active turnover systems in terms of damage and replacement. So these stem cells actually have to be activated by vitamin D to begin to differentiate. And if you don't have enough vitamin D, they just kind of sit there and twiddle their fingers and go, well, what am I supposed to do? The other thing that was fascinating to me is that normally vitamin D is very useful to tell our immune system to not be so trigger happy, to kind of relax. And in autoimmune diseases, we know that our immune system is obviously hyperactive, but it takes literally a sledgehammer of vitamin D to quiet them down. And so, and this is particularly true in rheumatoid arthritis, and there's been some good studies about it. So you're never going to achieve those levels with just sun exposure.
Okay. No, that's a good correlation, especially talking about the sun callus and how then that starts to weigh into vitamin D formation. So absolutely. Do you have a favorite way to test the gut? Do you have like a stool test? What's your favorite way to like objectively measure what's going on in the gut?
Well, so when the Human Microbiome Project wasn't finished until 2017, actually, the year my book was published, the original. And so we didn't know much about who was living down there. And not a day goes by that we don't learn some exciting new correlation between the species that live in our gut and the interaction that they have and our gut wall. But so I use Vibrant Wellness, Vibrant America testing for leaky gut. I've been working with them from the day they started. And so I look primarily at anti-zonulin IgG, anti-actin IgG, anti-LPSs. I have not been impressed with most stool testing up until, and again, I have no affiliation with Vibrant, except I like to talk to them. They don't pay me, but their gut zoomer, and these are stupid names. I've told them that.
I agree.
And they actually were named Zoomers before Zoom calls. So, but it's stupid. But their gut zoomer to me is very useful. And so I'll use the leaky gut tests that are blood tests, but I'll also use the gut zoomer or stool test to find out an additional piece of information that we didn't have access to up until really a few years ago. So I'll use the combination of the two. The good news is, and I've published this data at the American Heart Association, 94% of my patients with leaky gut and autoimmune diseases, blood tests proven autoimmune diseases, are in remission 9 months to a year after starting my program. And not bad, not perfect, but they're in remission off of their drugs. So, and you can show that the gut wall is sealed. You can show that there's no longer, for instance, any antibodies to gluten or other wheat. So you can make a difference. The longest it's ever taken me to seal somebody's leaky gut was 4 years, believe it or not.
Wow.
It is not an instantaneous process.
Right.
Long ago, I was naive. I thought we could do it in a couple weeks.
Right. I actually have a patient recently that, we started them on the program. We have their gut testing, all the things, which I suspected you were going to go, with the Vibrant answer. I love Vibrant Labs. I was one of their first adopters here in Texas. So I love the intestinal permeability markers, which typically I'll run it with the wheat zoomer test. And then you have the gut zoomer, which we look at a lot. I love their neural zoomer, but I agree. What's up with the zoomer word, right? It's crazy. But yeah, I recently had someone, we just started them on the program. We talked about circadian biology, foods, timing of food, supplementation, all these things. Literally had a week go by and they email and they said, nothing's changed yet. Why isn't this working? And I'm like, okay, let's back up. This is a marathon. So I'm glad you bring that up. When you're working with the expert, right, Dr. Gundry, right, you just heard, right, hey, 9 to 12 months, it's taken up to 4 years. I mean, this is a process, 100%. And do you have like certain pillars that you walk people through? Food, circadian, supplement. I mean, what is your big pillars here that you want to navigate with the majority of patients? Or is it truly just based on testing and, what you find?
Well, for instance, of my patients with leaky gut and or an autoimmune disease, but all people with autoimmune disease have leaky gut, I can assure you. I'm convinced, as others, and more people every year join the crowd, that autoimmune diseases are merely a manifestation of leaky gut. And we should have known this because Hippocrates said 2,500 years ago that all disease begins in the gut. Mm-hmm. Now, probably should have said all disease begins in a leaky gut, like Alessio Fasano says. He stole that from me, but that's okay. He's a great guy. Yeah, I think we're beginning to realize the mechanisms of how this happened. But to back up, 100% of my patients with leaky gut have antibodies to the various forms of wheat, whether it's wheat germ agglutinin, whether it's gluten, whether it's non-gluten proteins. 100% of them are positive. 70% of them have antibodies to corn that are, and we can go on and on. A lot of people have antibodies to lectins. The lectin zoomer, guess where they got that idea?
I figured that, yeah.
And dairy is often a mischief maker. Eggs are surprisingly a mischief maker. And one of the things that's been very educational to me through the years back is food sensitivities. Back before all of these tests, I used to run allergy tests on all my patients. And, we'd put 100 pinpricks on their back and look what turned red. And quite frankly, I was never very impressed that it gave us any useful information. But that's all we had. When, leaky gut was discovered, people like Vibrant said, hey, now there's intestinal permeability. Now there's literally undigested food particles could be coming through the wall of the gut, and they could be recognized as foreign. Like I tell my patients, suppose you eat a lot of broccoli and you have leaky gut. You're a piece of broccoli, not literally, but could come through the wall of the gut, and your immune system says, what the heck is a piece of broccoli doing in here? That's foreign to me. I've never seen broccoli before, and I'm going to remember it. I'm going to make an antibody to it so that the next time I see it, I'll know what it is and I'll attack it. So this was IgG mediated. Like when we looked for COVID, you looked for IgG antibodies. Oh yeah, you had COVID. So that means it actually got into you rather than IgE, which is a totally different system.
Right.
And lo and behold, when we started using food sensitivities and added this to the mix, it answered a lot of really useful questions as, gee, I'm eating all this healthy stuff. I'm eating all this anti-inflammatory diet. And then we'll find somebody, for instance, that is very sensitive to lemons. And I have a ton of people who are sensitive to lemons. And it's like, what the heck? Or ginger. Ginger was another huge one that just blew me away. There's tons of people who are sensitive to ginger.
Yeah.
And so on. And so that's been very useful.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing, the other thing I think scares me to death, and I should have realized this. There's a husband and wife microbiology team at Stanford, the Sonnenbergs, which I hope you're aware of their research.
Yes.
The Sonnenbergs are kind of the doomsayers of the human microbiome. Probably for good reason. They really think that most of us have a desert wasteland for our microbiome rather than a tropical rainforest. And we really want a tropical rainforest. We want a great terrain, as I talk about in this book. Mm-hmm. They are pessimists that we will never be able to achieve that. I'm less a pessimist, but I do think they're right that it's going to take a lot of hard work. And I think when we now look at particularly who's living in our guts, and for me, particularly looking at short chain fatty acid production, particularly butyrate, it is, I shouldn't have been shocked, but initially, it was shocking to me how few people make adequate amounts of butyrate and short chain fatty acids. The other thing that's disappointing to me is that we can give people butyrate. We can give people Akkermansia, the holy grail of intestinal bugs.
Right.
And so many people, we cannot get Akkermansia to start growing in patients. And I don't know if you've noticed that as well, but
I have.
It's we're just really scratching the surface. And I've talked about this in my last two books of understanding that, it takes, as Hillary Clinton would say, it takes a village. We haven't cracked the code of how do we reconstitute this tropical rainforest, which bug needs what to eat that another bug produced. And so we could keep throwing all these probiotics into people. But actually, my story from my Palm Springs office is, let's call probiotics grass seed. And I give my patients grass seed, and they come back 3 months later and said, you gave me bad grass seed, it didn't grow. And I said, well, what did you do with it? Well, I took it out to the sand and sprinkled it around. It didn't grow. And I said, well, did you fertilize it? No, you didn't tell me to. Well, did you water it? No, you didn't tell me to. I said, well, what did you expect? And I think that's what we're learning. We can swallow all these probiotics, but we really haven't quite figured out the fertilizer and the water, if you will, that's going to make these guys grow.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. I've noticed the same thing with Akkermansia, and typically those, and by the way, same thing with the low butyrate. I mean, across the board, I don't know when the last time I looked at a gut zoomer and did not see low butyrate. Now, obviously, I'm seeing more, brain injury, neurodegenerative disorders, neurodevelopmental disorders, those types of things. But I mean, it's almost just standard. I mean, when I get those test results back, I know their short chain fatty acids are going to be low, which is a concern. That's a fuel for the brain. But what I've seen is that those people with low Akkermansia have a high biofilm that we need to break apart, and then we have certain supplement strategies and whatnot. And oftentimes when we start to do that, people start having parasites coming out of them, anything from lungworms to all kinds of stuff. Have you noticed a similar parasitic load in individuals?
We see a number of people that have kind of the garden variety parasites like Giardia, and we've seen a number of amoeba. They're actually, knock on wood, pretty easy to get rid of with supplementation rather than antibiotics.
Right.
Knock on wood, I haven't had to do that. One of the humorous things, I haven't met a human being that claims they have candidiasis in their intestines that actually has an overgrowth of Candida in their intestines. Anyhow, but it's good on the internet, I guess.
Buzzword, yeah.
I think biofilms are another piece of this. Bacteria love to protect themselves. Anyone who doesn't believe in biofilms has probably never visited a dentist and had some of their plaque chipped off of their tooth, which is merely a biofilm. So these things exist, and we shouldn't poo-poo them as pseudoscience.
Exactly. You've written extensively about lectins. I think I would like to kind of just give the audience a little bit of an overview about what are they and why should we care about them?
Yeah, and this gets actually to the same point. I can seal somebody's leaky gut. It'll take a while, but I can do it. They can do it. But as I tell them, look, if you keep swallowing razor blades, and I call lectins razor blades, then you'll just slice things back open. And so one of the things, my research at Yale was animals obviously want to eat plants, and plants in general don't want you to eat them or their babies, with the exception of their fruits, which they would be delighted for you to eat those babies and carry them off to some distant spot. So plants can't run, they can't hide, they can't fight, but they're chemists of incredible ability. So they use chemical and biologic warfare against their predators to make their predators not thrive or feel bad. And a smart predator says, gee, every time I eat these plants or these plant babies, I don't feel very good, and I'm going to stop eating those.
Except for humans. We keep coming back for more.
Humans are really stupid. Now, people really get upset with me, my critics, that, these lectins, well, cultures have been eating lectin-containing foods for a very long time, and that's true. We've built up a defense system against these biological weapons that plants produce. And we've had, up until recently, an incredibly good balance of power. And our defense systems, for instance, acid in our stomach is part of our defense system. Mucus is mucopolysaccharides. Lectins are proteins that wish to bind to sugar molecules. And it just so happens that mucus has a lot of those sugar molecules that lectins like to bind to, so we could trap them. Number 3, our gut microbiome, if it was normal, loves eating lectin-containing foods. There are oxalate-eating bacteria. They're all gone in anyone who says they're sensitive to oxalates. And they're gone. I'm sorry. There are gluten-eating bacteria. They're gone in most people. So it's just that we're, the antibiotics we've taken, the antibiotics that are given to our animals, glyphosate, which was patented as an antibiotic, the antacids that acid in the stomach is really good at digesting lectins. If you take a Prilosec OTC or a Nexium to have a corn dog, then the lectins in the corn will do a number on you, and so on. So the other thing that I've tried to point out in the last couple books is, look, traditional cultures have always figured out a way to defuse these plant compounds. And most of it is through fermentation. Most cultures fermented their lectin-containing foods. Or they peeled or de-seeded tomatoes or peppers, etc. Interestingly enough, soaking beans have their own microbiome. And anyone who's soaked beans, as I have, knows that there's this scum and foam that rises to the top. And that's the fermentation of the lectins in beans by their own microbiome. So you look at Tuscany, the Tuscans always soak their beans for 48 hours and pour it off every 6 hours or so. And it's like, wow, what a waste of time. You could just put it in the water and boil it. No, they're degrading the lectin content of these things. And so you just look and go, wow, the people who developed corn always treated corn with boiling it in lime juice or treating it with lye, nixtamalization to remove the hull and to keep corn from binding niacin. And it's like, son of a gun, how do these guys know all this? Well, they didn't want to feel sick, and they got around it. So there you go. So that's a short course in lectins.
Right. Yeah. I read your book when it first came out about lectins, and it actually helped my wife quite a bit. And I was just, it didn't make, it made sense to me once I learned all of that, right? And what you just walked us through. But when, you're first starting to look at it, you're like, wait, these foods are, quote, healthy. Like, why am I not supposed to be eating them? And so, and it did. It helped her gut issues that she was having. And so it became very clear to me that, hey, this was a thing. And, you mentioned soaking beans. It's funny because literally my grandmother would do that, right? She would soak beans for like 2 days. And I'm like, why are you doing this? This is,
what a waste of time.
And, when you ask her, it was because her mom did it and her mom did it. And, it was just passed on. Well, now what do? You just put them in the Instapot. No one soaks beans anymore. And then, everyone walks around with inflamed gut and an inflamed brain after they eat. So, so just to shift a little bit, because I'm huge on light, I'm huge on laser therapy and whatnot. But there's growing evidence that our microbiome, our gut health, our intestinal permeability markers can actually be changed based on light exposure. Have you looked at how light can shape and have an impact on the microbiome and gut health?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I've always, once we learned about these guys, I've always told people that jet lag is actually caused by a change in the circadian rhythm of your gut microbiome, not you. And my wife and I don't get jet lag anymore. We'll actually carry a little concoction of probiotics and polyphenols and just kind of load up before we leave and load up when we arrive, and knock on wood, we don't have jet lag anymore. But so, and light exposure on the suprachiasmatic nucleus is actually very important to affect that circadian rhythm. Interestingly, long ago, I was a consultant to, lack of a better word, a do-good venture capitalist company out of New York City, and I won't mention the name, that, among other things, had invested in a company out of Florida that was one of the first to develop a non-blue light light bulb for nursing mothers, for the bedroom, etc. And this was when the evilness of blue light was first being talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And the head of this company in Florida and I started talking, and because I was very interested in red lasers and red light therapy on the microbiome and on mitochondria function. And he was a real wonderful nerd. He says, "Oh yeah." He says, there's all these kind of cool papers on red light therapy and how it changes the microbiome and red light laser on how it affects mitochondrial function. He said, "Are you actually interested in that?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, we should develop all these devices." And then, so we went to this company and said, "Hey, here's an area." This was 20 years ago. "This is an area we ought to really get into." And they go, what a crazy idea. Nobody's going to do that. But you're right. There is just emerging now. People are actually going, "Hey, wait a minute. This is an area we should be interested in." So yes.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely noticed huge changes clinically. Now, a lot of that's anecdotal, but then we also see changes in labs. We see changes across the board. I like to think of photobiomodulation as an accelerator, right? And so it's going to accelerate neuroplasticity, or it's going to help reduce inflammation, so we can get change faster in that regard, right? So I like to have it a part of the routine, whether it's at home, whether it's in the clinic. Of course, you don't have to buy, an expensive laser. There's various LED panels, but then also we have this thing in the sky called the sun. And so that's free. So people, they have access to, different forms of light. They just need to, understand it better and understand that there's research that shows specifically 808 nanometers had a positive impact on the microbiome. So the research is out there. It's very, very compelling and growing, and definitely something that we use on a daily basis, working through patients. So something else, just to kind of shift a little bit, we're talking about, kind of clinical stuff here. I'm also a huge fan of vagus nerve stimulus, and we do it in various ways. But do you have an opinion on, is this good? Should we be doing it? Should we not be doing it? What do you think about the 500 different products and probably more that claim they do this? What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I think particularly in the last few books, and you alluded to this when we started, when I was in medical school, the vagus nerve basically told the heart and the gut and the lungs what to do, what the brain wanted it to do, using the sympathetic nervous system. And lo and behold, who would have guessed that for every one fiber in the vagus nerve from the brain down to the gut, there's 9 fibers that are going from the gut up to the brain. So it was exactly the opposite of what we thought. And it is kind of one of the telephone lines from the gut microbiome to the brain. I think the other thing we thought when the idea of a second brain was that, well, there are a ton of neurons down in the gut. Maybe they're talking to the brain. Well, they're merely receivers of information from the gut microbiome. And I talk about in the book, one of the things that was shocking, I guess, was I was a general surgeon before I was a heart surgeon back in the dark ages. And we would treat ulcer disease by cutting the vagus nerve. Mm. And it was actually very effective. We got better at it, and we found that we only had to cut the vagus nerve fibers to the stomach rather than the rest of the belly, mm-hmm. and achieve the same result. Well, fast forward. So a lot of people have had vagotomies for ulcer disease, and these people are now much older. And lo and behold, in Parkinson's research, it was discovered that people who had had a vagotomy had 50% reduction in Parkinson's compared to people who hadn't had a vagotomy. And if you look at people who had just the vagotomy to their stomachs and the rest of the vagus nerve was intact, there was absolutely no difference in Parkinson's. So you go, wow, how did that work? And again, it's been worked out. For instance, we now know that lectins can climb the vagus nerve and actually can target the substantia nigra, just to bring up one thing. But it's also an amazing direct wire communication system between, hey, there's mischief afoot down in the gut, and our immune system in the gut says, oh my gosh, we can't hold the line down here anymore. We're being overrun by invaders, and, call up on the phone to our buddies up in the brain, the glia and microglia and astrocytes. And it's like, arm yourselves, put stuff in the way because the horde is on the way up. And so.
That's interesting. Actually, I'm not familiar with that research. I want to go look at it. That's
great. And I actually reference it in the last two books. It's
nice.
It's fascinating. It's like, holy cow.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. Well, would you say, right? I'm a big neuroplasticity guy. Everything that we do is geared around developing positive neuroplasticity. Would you say that microbial diversity in the gut is basically a proxy for neuroplasticity?
Yeah, and we can go kind of as deep and nerdy as you want, but we know even the placental microbiome has a huge play in early development of the brain of the child, of the fetus. And it's literally the microbiome and its products, which I call postbiotics, that actually, control in an epigenetic fashion who's going to, differentiate, what connections are going to be made. And even in early development, we know the better your microbiome, the more diverse your microbiome, the smarter you're going to be, the bigger your brain is, the more connections are made. And there are some of us who really think that we just happen to be a vehicle for our microbiome, and that the microbiome we are the home of our microbiome, and our microbiome merely uses us to go find what helps them out, or if there's bad guys in there, helps the bad guys out. Bacteria have been around for 3 billion years. They're the most successful life form ever. It bothers people, for me and others, to say that bacteria are sentient beings, but they clearly see, not with eyes, but they know who's around them. Mm-hmm. They have this most sophisticated communication system between themselves and us. And now with the discovery of exosomes and extracellular vesicles, we know that bacteria, and for that matter, plants and fungi, can actually send genetic codes to our genome to activate what they want our genome to do. And, get over it. We should have realized that this is such an incredible, sophisticated system that we're just now scratching the surface on. So,
absolutely. Yeah, I love that you bring up exosomes and extracellular vesicles. It's a huge part of regenerative medicine that I've been looking at for the past 2 years. Actually, we use EVs clinically, and I'm actually looking at how different wavelengths of light can alter extracellular vesicles and how they communicate with stem cells and with other cellular constituents. So definitely a huge interest of mine. But you're right, like there's this whole communication system that we're just getting into being able to understand, but there has to be so much more. And I think that it even goes into the biophoton world, right, where there's communication occurring via biophotons as well. which is, I mean, that's a whole quantum discussion that, we can't even start at this point in time. I think that it's easy to understand that, look, this is a complicated matter. There's a lot that goes into getting your gut right so that you can have overall health and wellness and achieve, whether it's optimal performance or you're trying to, work with a pathology or whatever. So for the people listening, they might be feeling a little overwhelmed. What's the first domino to knock over here? What should they start doing tomorrow?
Well, number one, the University of California, San Diego thinks that the average American should be taking 10,000 international units of vitamin D3 a day. And I think that's a really good place to start. I do think if you're at all afraid of, quote, high dose vitamin D, then, take some vitamin K2 with it. It's quite protective. If you're really afraid of vitamin D, then stay on a low calcium diet, but I don't think that's a big worrisome thing. Number two, stop swallowing razor blades temporarily. And number three, the more the work from the Sonnenbergs, if it teaches us anything, is that bacteria love to eat fiber, particularly soluble fiber, but there's a few insoluble fibers they like. But swallowing all the fiber in the world does not change your gut diversity and does not change markers of inflammation from their research in humans. But the combination of soluble fiber with fermented foods, and in their experiments, they used yogurts and kefirs, but fermented foods are vinegars. Believe it or not, extra dark chocolate is a fermented food. Good news. Coffee, tea is a fermented food. Wine is a fermented food. Good news. So there's the more, kimchi, sauerkraut, the more fermented foods, a lot of cheeses are fermented foods that we get in our diet, the better. So that's kind of where to start. Those are the three things you can kind of start doing today to really make a difference.
Yeah. Do you think everyone should just go out and start swallowing probiotics, or is there a certain thing that they should look for? Do you have a certain product? What do you think there?
Yeah, it's interesting. When years ago, not years ago, but a few years ago, I made a probiotic called 24 strain probiotic from Gundry MD. And it was based on my research of who really needs to be in that tropical rainforest that probably isn't. And it's encapsulated so it doesn't get digested by stomach acid. And this was actually before we had really good microbiome tests. And it was based on animal research. Lo and behold, what tickles me is with my patients, when we look at who's missing in their microbiome, it correlates so well with the 24 strain that I developed. And, I go, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. But yeah, it was based on research, but then now we've got all this human research and it's like, son of a gun, those are part of the missing ingredient. So yeah. So 24 strain probiotic from Gundry MD. And
absolutely.
Shameless plug, but it is interesting that the research bears it out that those are some of the missing guys.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's a phenomenal product. And, you developed it with phenomenal intention and really good evidence-backed research there. So it's great. So for those that, want to learn more about you, about your work, where can they go to learn more? I know, you have your new book out. Where do you want to point people to learn more?
Well, they can come to drgundry.com or gundrymd.com. We just passed 1 million subscribers to our YouTube channel. not bad. And the Dr. Gundry podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. And hopefully I pop up on your feed waving at you for Gundry MD. So.
Absolutely. I think the majority of my viewers already know of you. So, I'm just so honored that you're on today, Dr. Gundry. You're a true legend. Your impact in the world continues to grow, but already what you have done has just been, so much for people suffering, but then also for those just wanting to optimize their health and wellness. So for everyone out there listening, if this information can help someone that you know and love, please share it with them. That's why we're having this conversation. That's why Dr. Gundry came in today to talk with us. We're both here to help people. So please share this information, disseminate it accordingly. Dr. Gundry, is there anything that you want to tell the world before we sign off here?
Well, somebody asked me, I just turned 75 2 weeks ago. And one of my new patients says, geez, why I still see patients 6 days a week. He says, you don't have to see, me or anybody else. He said, what are you doing at 75 doing this? I said, look, I get up every day fully expecting to see what I would have described to be as a miracle 30 years ago. And basically, why wouldn't I get up if I knew I was going to see a miracle happen? So that's why I get up and see patients 6 days a week. But on the seventh day, I'm at Gundry MD. So hoping to create new miracles.
Right. That's amazing. Life goals for me, man. I look up to you. I definitely want to strive to be you one day in that same category. So I deeply appreciate you coming on here today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. So let's make miracles.
Absolutely.
We hope today's episode has inspired you to take that next step toward your best self. Remember, the path to longevity is paved with small, daily decisions. Your journey is unique, and every step, every choice, brings you closer to your ultimate vision of a healthier, happier life. For more insights, tips, and resources, visit drbrandоncrawford.com.